PowerPlayChess, brought to you in association with Kagi. I've got an absolutely cracking game to show you here. It's game one of the final of the Weissenhaus Freestyle Tournament. So it's Fischer random chess, but they're playing with a classical long time control. So we have Vincent Keymer, the 20-year-old home crowd favourite, playing against Fabiano Caruana from the States, 20-year-old against a 32-year-old. So Keymer is coming off the back of this fantastic victory against Magnus Carlsen. So we're into the final. Now here is the baseline. It's a pretty weird one, with the king sort of, we're in the middle, the knights at the side. Okay, let's see what the players made of this. Well, Keymer played c4, and immediately that introduces a threat. Queen takes h7. And already, this is actually slightly awkward for black. I mean, obviously, it's daft to follow suit because white gets there first and this pawn is protected. So forget that. You don't really want to play g6 because that leaves the knight very poorly placed, and white gains another move by attacking that knight. Do you want to play knight g6? I mean, that feels like the most natural, but then knight f3, and suddenly potentially there's knight g5. I mean, if black gets this wrong, well, you can see the state of the king. Okay, so what about h6? Well, that's amusing. Queen h7 wins a piece. Unbelievable. So Caruana played knight f6. Okay, looks reasonable. Knight f3. b6, after quite a big think. b4. So that introduces potentially a threat to take on f6 and take on h7. Caruana again had quite a big think here and played c5. And if bishop takes and queen h7, knight g6, well, black has some compensation here. This is actually quite tricky. But let's compare with the game. So Keymer didn't take straight away. First of all, he threw in bishop e5. Now that's very clever. Now, Fabi doesn't want to advance the queen, blocking the bishop, so he played d6. And only then did Keymer take on f6. And then take on h7. And then knight g6. So this is a very strange position. So why did Keymer induce d6? Well, if you had left the pawn on d7, then actually black has better compensation for the pawn, because that queen can sometimes get into the game along this diagonal, somewhere along this diagonal. Sometimes just by playing knight e5. This was a really clever finesse. In any case, black does have compensation here. And it's a very, very strange position. Here, Keymer played e3, which is very sensible. So I've got a question for you. Why did he, I mean, obviously after e3, then Caruana took on b4. So why didn't Keymer first exchange on c5? Why give back the pawn? Well, maybe it's time for a think and drink already. Cheers. Black to play, what would you do? Well, black has bishop c6. It's an extraordinary move. And that king is in desperate trouble. Unbelievable. If e3, check. And that's checkmate. Extraordinary. Okay, let's go back. So instead of taking here, Keymer prudently played e3. Caruana took on b4. And again, a very prudent move. Bishop e2. So Keymer is actually preparing to get his king out of the middle. And the king is going to be a lot safer on the king's side behind that beautiful barricade of pawns. But black's position looks very odd. The pawns are a bit of a mess, but black has compensation here. And a very clever move here would be knight e5. I mean, frankly, looking at this position with human eyes, I would just think, well, white is better. But in fact, the computer points out this idea. And after knight takes, d takes e5. White castles, and then black castles. Suddenly, black achieves some coordination here, and there's a bit of pressure on d2. I mean, one day, this pawn majority might come good. But you can see black's position is far more harmonious than a couple of moves ago. That's not so clear. But Fabi instead decides to go on an adventure. While Keymer is developing the king side, he thinks, okay, I'll just maneuver my rook round and see what I can do there. So rook c2 defends the a pawn, bishop c6 threatens this one, and just in time Keymer gets out and Caruana played a rook a3, still trying to stir things up. Okay, well, I think it's time we did a compare and contrast here. Well, look at white's king side. I mean, this looks like a normal position from traditional chess. You're not going to be able to attack white's king here. And what a beautiful regular pawn structure as well. Great control in the centre, harmonious development. The queen has gone on a mad adventure, but it can come out or stay up there, depending. But compare with Caruana's position. Now that king is floating around. It's going to have to stay there. It's hardly going to castle kingside. So it's floating around in the middle. The rooks are split. That's a cardinal sin. Pawns are a mess. White controls the centre. I mean, white just optically looks fantastic here. And this is a very good position for white. Okay, the question is, how would you try and exploit this big positional advantage that white has? White to play. What are you going to do next? Well, to my eyes, Keymer played the most straightforward move, h4. When your king position is so compact, you can get away with advancing the h-pawn. Doesn't hurt white's position in any way. And this is a very useful little asset to push that pawn all the way to break up black's pawns. That'll leave these pawns doubled and isolated. So very good move. I mean, I'm sure there are other good moves there. I mean, potentially knight h5 as well, and maybe just taking on g7. Also looks pretty good, I have to say. But h4, yeah, good move. Bishop a4, hitting the rook, which came back. a5, h5, there we go. Pawn advances. And white has a number of very promising continuations. With the king in the middle and black's pieces really horribly placed, it makes a lot of sense just to break things open with c5. I also like h6, just continuing the strategy to break up those pawns. But Keymer went for d5. Also a very nice option. Giving up that pawn, who cares? Knight d4, so that's his idea. This knight comes from a beautiful central position, looking at some lovely squares here. Queen d7 played. And rook a1. Very simple. So just exchanging off, or attempting to exchange off, this active rook. And yeah, the exchange would actually leave that bishop very oddly placed, supported by the queen, but it can't move anywhere. I mean, looks really nasty. You could even imagine the queen coming back to a2, which actually traps the bishop. So very unpleasant situation. So that's why the rook moved across. And Keymer continued with his plan of advancing. You see, these pawns are just horrible now. Of course, queen takes f7 is good. But Keymer was even more cruel, decided to go in with the bishop. And Caruana is utterly lost here. I mean, if he'd resigned in this position, it would not have surprised me. I was watching this game, I was expecting resignation at any moment. I mean, it's a really depressing position to play. But fair play to Caruana. He kept going, trying to find something to do, sack the exchange. And bishop here, perhaps he's hoping to get these pawns rolling. But white has such domination. Queen d3, attacks this, defends this. And yeah, bishop takes pawn possible. I mean, you can do anything. Rook b1. So it looks like he might be preparing just to sack back and break through with the rook. I mean, that's one possible option. Depends how Caruana plays. Knight c8. He could just play like this. Beautiful position for white, but well, this is even more cruel actually. Knight f1. Looks like well, he's redeploying the knight. Maybe here, who knows? b5. Okay, Caruana is trying to stir things up. C takes b5. Queen c7. Okay, so Keymer changes his tune a little bit. He plays knight e3, so he wants to cover all these squares. Knight b6. And yeah, change of plan. Rook c1, because he realizes that, in fact, yeah, he can go in a completely different way and basically just kill all counterplay here. f5. Okay, a little distraction, but Keymer's very happy to take that. Okay, the bishop pops out, wants to take here, but queen f4, no problem. Defends the pawn, attacks d6, and rook c6. It's a gift. Why not slam the rook down? a3 from Caruana, and a rook takes d6, of course. If that's taken, the queen comes in, and well, the bishop is actually dead on b3. I mean, black's position is just a catastrophe. Knight d7 played and rook a6. That was the final move of the game. Caruana resigned. So why did he resign? Well, good grief, for so many reasons. Look at black's king. Absolutely dreadful. Compare it with white's king. Okay, how might the game end? Well, for example, a2, d6, this is the issue. And the bishop comes into play and rook a8 check. Well, I mean, this is just a sample line of what might possibly happen. It's just so depressing for black to play. I mean, that was a rout from Vincent Keymer. Very well played to him. So he takes the lead in the match. Tomorrow, Caruana will play with white, and he's in a must-win situation. Let's see if he can hit back. But I tell you what, that was a very depressing game to play. He will need to really regain his strength if he's going to come back in the match. There you go. Hope you enjoyed that. Thanks for watching.